All right, welcome back. You're watching Liquid Lunch on Biz TV, where we cover the gamut of topics of things that you're interested in, hopefully. And we try to break it up, bring in all kinds of experts from all different places. I do want to point out that some years ago, there was another one of these protests in New York called Occupy Wall Street, where this same bunch of hooligans was shacking up in a park, Zuccotti Park in New York City, and it was right by Wall Street. And when people going to work with suits and ties on were walking by, they would be throwing things at you, screaming things at you, yelling things at you. My brother Derek and I, were fed up with it, and we started a counter-protest called Occupy a Desk, Get a Job, which we had our First Amendment right to stand there right across the street from and say this, and we got attacked. It was actually fun just to show how intolerant these people are. But it seems like these days First Amendment is very selective, like who can use it, who doesn't get to use it. And one of the great public interest attorneys on the planet Earth joins us all the time. He's always right on top of things, got his finger on the pulse. John Banzhaf is with us again, and John is a professor over at the esteemed George Washington University Law School. And if anybody knows about First Amendment, it's you, my friend. So these Black Lives Matter paintings are being permitted to be painted in mostly blue cities around the country. And they're using the First Amendment. And you're saying there's a growing thing out there where other people are using the First Amendment to combat that.
Well, that's exactly right. The First Amendment isn't biased. It is supposed to apply to all causes equally. And as I predicted, people are now using the First Amendment to fight back against this idea that a cause, no matter how righteous some people may think it is, don't have a right to paint their own signs on city streets and to exclude others. So, for example, a day or so ago, a woman in Redwood City simply said, I want to be able to counter that Black Lives Movement, which is painted on a street in Redwood City. I want to put up MAGA 2020, which is obviously a somewhat different slant. And the city immediately backed down. They said they would no longer permit their streets to be used that way, and they painted over the Black Lives Matter on the street. Well, I predicted at that time others would use the same argument, and it now turns out that there are about a dozen cities where Black Lives Matter signs and murals and so on have been painted on streets. And a new group, presumably an anti-abortion group, has come in and they've demanded the right to put up their signs. They want to say Black preborn lives matter. Again, a slightly different viewpoint. But under the First Amendment, the city can't permit one viewpoint and not another. You can't permit Black Lives Matter and then not permit, for example, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, or whatever. So the First Amendment is an important tool here, and I predict that more and more groups will decide they want their messages up, and eventually the cities are going to have to return to a state of normalcy where people just don't have the right to paint their own messages on the street, no matter how good or important they think their cause is.
So what you're saying is, for years, I guess, public domain like streets and sidewalks have been accepted or permissible to be a forum for art and expression of First Amendment. That's allowed.
Right. Here we have a slightly different size. Certainly in terms of simply marching, demonstrating, assembling, and so on, a city cannot say it's okay for X group to do it and not for Y group. It has to be what we call content neutral. But that's because traditionally, for hundreds of years, people have used city streets to demonstrate. However, it certainly is not the custom or tradition for people to be able to paint city streets. If I went out into New York or Washington tomorrow and decided to paint something on a street, I would be arrested. But when a city or any municipal entity decides to permit, or to allow something to be used for public expression, then once again, it must be contract neutral. A great Supreme Court decision. It was Tennessee. Cincinnati, Tennessee at a municipal auditorium. They didn't have to rent it out, but they decided they would. They would allow plays to be produced there. Then when people wanted to put on Hair, which of course had a strong anti-war, pro-hippie semblance.
Yeah, I've been trying to put on Hair
They
for
said
like
no,
15 years.
and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't discriminate. Once you say that one group can use it, once you open it up as a public forum, then you cannot base it on the viewpoint or the content. I think the analogy to the city streets is exactly the same. Ordinarily, you can't go around painting city streets, but if they say to one group, sure, go ahead, paint the street. Hey, we'll even help you do it. We'll give you the paint. Then they have to do the same for other similarly situated groups.
So maybe you could help us and maybe give me a draft of a template, and I could start spreading it around the country to our audiences who they're not against Black Lives Matter, but people are becoming more and more frustrated, feeling like they don't have a voice in this anymore. The silent majority doesn't even have a platform to speak out. You got Twitter muting people, you got Facebook muting people, you got YouTube muting people. Can regular people just send a little letter into their local mayor or superintendent or county board and say, hey, I would like this message painted on a street, not even a particular street? Is that a good way to start?
Well, that's what the single woman, an attorney, did in Rosewood, California, and it worked for her. As you may remember, I got started in this whole public interest area when I demanded time to reply to one-sided presentations on television, that is, cigarette commercials. And in the end, I was given hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free time. We got rid of cigarette commercials. But I think it would be better if it came from some kind of a group, because under what we call a limited public forum, which is what painting on a street probably is, they can put some content neutral restrictions. They might say, for example, you have to be a recognized group, you have to be a tax exempt organization, etc.
Got it.
Also,
So
any demand coming from a group is going to have much more clout. So I think it's doable.
That
it
makes
ought
sense.
to be done. And you don't have to be against Black Lives Matter, I think, to want to post something about Israel or Palestine. Take your choice. Or
Well, what about this? I'm half Italian, half Irish. Okay, I'm proud of both sides of my family ancestry and nation of origin, and I'm really perturbed about how no one sticks up for poor old Christopher Columbus. And the guy, did one noteworthy thing. He found the darn place where we call America. What if I teamed up with, my friend Andre Domino from the Italian American organization, and we started asking legislators or town councils to put Christopher Columbus matters? That sounds pretty benign.
I think if the Italian American organization made that request, or Italian Lives Matter, it would certainly have to be seriously considered. And if they denied the request, then you got a good First Amendment right to go into court. And what would be very interesting, I think, is whether or not the ACLU would back you. Because the ACLU has been very supportive of the Black Lives Movement, which is fine. That's their decision. But they've always maintained that, quote, the Constitution is our only client. They have been steadfast defenders of the First Amendment. So it'd be very interesting if they would be willing to represent you or any other group which says, we want to have our sign up because Black Lives Matter has their sign up. Will the ACLU go to court for you? That's going to be something which is going to be very interesting to see.
Well, I think I'm going to take up that cause, because I've had a number of Italian American organizational leaders on my show trying to bring attention to the fact that, there were times in America in the late 1800s and early 1900s where, Italians weren't even allowed to get city jobs. They were banned from city jobs, and, they just turned out to go out and be hardworking people and create new generations of hardworking people. And, Christopher Columbus is an easy scapegoat because there's not a big organization to stick up for him. But I don't know if you've been following this. When you go to Black Lives Matter and you click on donate, it takes you to a website called Act Blue. And then if you go on Act Blue and you do a few more searches deeper into it, it turns out that Planned Parenthood and the ACLU are beneficiaries. So we might be up against the ACLU on this.
I think it'd be very interesting to challenge them, ask them to bring a lawsuit on your behalf or make a demand, and then if necessary, bring a lawsuit on your behalf. And if they refuse, that certainly would be something that ought to be brought to the public attention because they claim that they are First Amendment first, that they represent the Constitution, and in situations where the Constitution might be contrary to the interests of Black Lives Matter or some justice organization or any other organization,
all right, well,
they should stand up for the First Amendment.
Johnny, thank you so much. We're out of time, but I'm going to report back to you on this. I'm gonna try to get something going here. Thank you.
Good for you. Good.
Quick break. We're out.